Moxie Talkers. I think you're going to really enjoy our 383rd guest. It's the first time we've ever had anyone in this genre of guest. His name is Andrew Pleasure. He's a cult survivor, coach, and content creator. And in the very beginning, long before he was born, his parents were both devout fundamentalist Christians, and his maternal grandparents raised his mother Methodist until they converted to fundamentalist Christianity. And his paternal grandmother was a fundamentalist Christian, and his grandpa eventually converted. Andrew's parents met at Hyles-Anderson College in the late 1980s. Hyles-Anderson is known for being a very strict fundamentalist school. His father studied to be a pastor, and his mother was going to be an English teacher. They got married in the early 1990s and were excited to have children, but had several pregnancy difficulties. And after contemplating adoption, and they prayed on it until it finally happened, they had 3 boys, and Andrew, our guest, was the middle child. They interpreted the birth of their children as a prayer answered and dedicated their children to the God of Christianity. Homeschooling was and is popular among fundamentalist Christians because of the separation from the world's outside influences and total control of their children's lives. Andrew grew up in the independent fundamental Baptist cult, better known as the IFB cult, at Gospel Light Baptist Church in Walkertown, North Carolina, pastored by the very popular and very well-known Bobby Robertson until his 2018 death. He was so popular, he was called America's pastor, quote unquote, and Gospel Light was one of the largest IFB churches in the United States. It was known for its, listen to this, for its large bus ministry that brought in thousands of kids every week. And Andrew's parents idolized him and acted like he was Jesus Christ himself, according to Andrew. The most psychologically damning aspect of it was the hateful sermons on the LGBTQ plus community, because you see, Andrew is openly gay. Growing up gay in fundamentalist Christianity, as one can imagine, is very tough because they are considered to be perverts that go around raping people and hurting children. Adding on to this trauma was being a child sexual assault survivor and keeping this secret. He felt shame for his assault and hearing how he deserved nothing good in his life. Loving yourself is difficult, you see, he said, when you feel like the closest to you find you unacceptable, and he was extremely hurt that the people who were supposed to take care of him denied him the health care he needed. His trust in his parents eroded and was forever destroyed, and he read books constantly to expand his mind and get rid of the black and white thinking, as he called it. Today, he is an influencer, and he brings awareness to religious trauma and has shared his story on many podcasts. And as of this taping, he works for one of the most world-renowned top cult experts named Rachel Bernstein, and helps her with social media marketing on her podcast called Indoctrination. And Andrew is on a mission of pursuing psychology to become a therapist and eventually a psychologist by researching religious trauma and helping present and future survivors of religious abuse. It is an honor for us to have Andrew join our Moxie Talk and to become part of the Moxie Talk library. Welcome to another edition of Moxie Talk, where we give you an intimate look into the courage, character, and defining moments of today's most inspiring individuals. I'm Kirt Jacobs, host of Moxie Talk, where previous guests have included leaders from the world of politics, business, culinary, sports, entertainment, art, law, community activism, and philanthropy. But today we have a religious trauma survivor. He's our 383rd guest. His name is Andrew Pleasure, and he considers himself a cult survivor, coach, and content creator. Andrew, welcome to Moxie Talk with Kirt Jacobs.
Thank you so much for having me on, Kirt. I am so excited for this interview.
That's great. I mean, first off, I want to acknowledge your authenticity and your honesty. You had reached out to us through a matching service, if you will, called Guestio, and I'm really happy that you did because we focus totally on origin stories. So so right out of the gate, I want to hit you with probably potentially maybe the strongest question of the entire Moxie Talk or interview. So how did growing up in a cult make you who you are today in terms of a leader or in any other variety or aspect of your life? How did it change you, I guess you should say?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is a very loaded question and a lot to dig into. But I think what I would say is that it has made me an extremely resilient person. And it really has made me question everything in my life. And a lot of that was deconstructing and dealing with a lot of the trauma that I went through growing
Mhm.
up in a Christian cult. So, it taught me to learn to trust myself, to
Mhm.
connect with myself, because growing up in that environment, I was taught that there was nothing good inside of me and that I shouldn't trust my mind or my heart, only rely on the religion and its teachings. And so I was so isolated
Mhm.
and I was indoctrinated and I suffered for years with depression and I was blamed a lot. So having to, being born in that situation and through that hardship, I had to learn to become my own hero and become resilient. I had to become my own rescue for,
Yeah,
very similar to that sentiment.
there was no lifeboat coming to save you.
No, there was none.
Yeah.
Not at all. And there were a lot of dark times and for me, like it took me to the point of being very suicidal and
Mhm.
nearly committing suicide, of just barely having any strength left in my spirit, but making that decision, I don't know what's going to happen
Mhm.
with my life, but I am going to claim my autonomy and do what is best for me. I don't know what lies ahead, but there
Sure.
has to be a better life than this. I think I can do this. I don't know how, but I think I can. And that's kind of the sentiment of what I felt when I had to make that internal decision to move forward and be resilient.
Well, let me ask you this for the audience that will or may watch this that doesn't know your background, and you don't have to name
Hmm.
names. You're welcome to, obviously, if you choose to. But
Hmm.
were the people that you were involved in with this, were they direct family members? Were you adopted? Was this a situation where you were kind of left at the doorstep, or was this an expectation of you, and you really didn't? It sounds like you didn't have any choice in the matter, but I want you to maybe
Yes.
clarify that.
Yeah. So I was born into a cult. My family or my parents, they were heavily involved in it. And so I was born into it. And the cult I grew up in is called the IFB. And for people who are not familiar, that stands for Independent Fundamental Baptist.
Mhm.
And I think you had Eric from the Preacher Boys
Yes.
podcast on the show. He does a great job. I was on his show this year, but he does a great job exposing the abuse that happens in the IFB cult. And just I know I don't have time to talk about the history of it, but all I'm going to say is this group started as a reaction to modernism in the 20s, and it just had this very stuck up attitude of we are not going to be around anyone who disagrees with us, even other Christians who might differ on beliefs. We're going to isolate from society, have our own little churches. We're going to run it however we want. No higher organization can hold us accountable for anything. As
Mhm.
we are the leaders in this place. No one can tell us what to do. And so in order for cults to survive, members need to have children. Like in these cults, like it is highly encouraged to
Good.
have children. Like I knew families, they had 10 children
Mhm.
in the cult that I grew up in. And it was just crazy to me. And that's the thing with my family, is that my parents struggled to have children. It took them 6 to 7 years to
Mhm.
become pregnant. So when they did finally have three boys, they saw that as like God answering their prayers. So that made
Mhm.
them very dedicated to really dedicate our lives to their religion, obviously without any of our consent. It was like there was no choice in that matter. So I was homeschooled my entire life for the
Mhm.
purpose of indoctrination. And my social life was in this cult, really, and like a homeschool group and a 4-H club, but it was all Christianity. Every environment, this version of Christianity had an influence on.
Wow. So if you had to describe IFB as you call it,
Mm,
as it's called, in a sentence or two or three bullet points without getting into the history, because people can look it up, I'm sure, on the internet. But
yeah.
what would you say is like the one or two things that really separate it from the pack, if you will,
Hmm.
cults or just other religious denominations? Is there one thing they're kind of known for?
Oof, I mean, a lot of people, when they look them up online, they just see a lot of extremist, or they hear a lot of extremist, hateful rhetoric.
Mhm.
That's really what that's what most people on the outside who are familiar think of it, and they do have a lot of hateful, extreme rhetoric. And I also grew up in that environment in the closet and not realizing it until my teen years. So being gay in this environment was not a good situation because there was a lot of hateful rhetoric around LGBTQ plus people, like calling for the death of them and saying that they deserve all these awful diseases. And I would say it was interesting because that was my only experience of Christianity.
Mhm.
So when I finally got out and I got to really learn about other versions, it was really weird to me. It was really weird to me to hear of a version of Christianity that was actually about love and
Yeah.
caring for people.
Wow. Wow.
So it's very, very fear-based, very shame-based, and it has this elitist kind of attitude. A lot of the IFB claims that the KJV Bible or the King James Version is the only word of God, and
Okay.
any other versions are not legitimate. So they have like the absolute truth, and
Mhm.
anyone who disagrees with them is wrong. So, these groups, these cults always claim to have the absolute truth. They have the answer, their way is the right way, and anyone who doesn't disagree with them is like influenced by Satan.
Mhm.
And just the demand also of this group to separate from the world and to isolate and like to only be around people who are like them. So homeschooling is really popular in the
Yeah.
IFB to isolate children, to indoctrinate them into the system. But the IFB also, they're so well known for like their hell and fire and brimstones sermon.
Mhm.
Again, that fear base. So much of that.
So, Andrew, you don't have to name names, but are your parents, I assume, and your other two siblings, are they still involved in IFB or have they stepped aside as well?
My parents are still involved in the IFB.
Okay.
Um, they actually, I would say they cult hopped. They went to another IFB church because, and it was actually surprising to me because I was raised in this one IFB church my entire life, and my parents have been attending it since the 90s. And they left it actually that summer, but they went to another IFB church who they just had the same exact teachings, just different people. um,
Oh, wow.
so
Okay.
yeah, they're still involved in the IFB. And I have two brothers. I'm the middle of two brothers, an older brother, and younger brother. My oldest brother, he works at an IFB church in West Virginia. So he is so heavily involved in it. And he's actually going to become a youth pastor at that church soon. So yeah, he is really deep into it. And my youngest brother, he's actually an atheist, which is very interesting.
Interesting. And he's still involved with IFB as an atheist?
He is not involved anymore at all. He does still live at home, but I think eventually he was able, I think, to really set boundaries with my parents because he tried to move out and he did for a while, but he had to come back. But I think it made my parents realize maybe how miserable it was
Sure.
being there, and so they have let off a little bit. Um, but it's been interesting as I've publicly left it and left the religion, navigating that relationship with my parents.
Mhm. So, how many, I guess, internationally and or nationally IFB members roughly are there in your opinion?
Mm, wow. I mean, I'm really not sure. Like, I mean, guessing in the US, I mean,
It's predominantly in the US, I would assume, right?
I would assume, yeah, I think predominantly it is the US. And I know they send missionaries across the world to spread it, but I'm not sure how much that is. But in the US, that's interesting because there were some like, okay, so the IFB church that I grew up in the 90s, it had like a few thousand people in it. It was one of the bigger ones. and not many of them are big. There are a few big ones across the US, like First Hammond Baptist, something that's attached to the Hyles-Anderson College. That's a really big IFB church that has a few thousand people. But I mean, trying to guesstimate across the US all the big and the tiny churches, I mean, I'm just gonna guess 100,000. I don't know. It could be lower than that. It could be, I'll just say 50 to 100,000. I'll just say that. I'm not just guesstimating because
And that's fine. I just wanted to give anyone that would fall upon our
yeah.
talk to just get
Mhm.
a flavor, a feel for if we're talking a million, you know, 10,000, but a
Yeah.
100,000 is 100,000, 50,000 is 50,000, and it's that's a lot of people, regardless of how
Yes.
you look at it.
Yeah.
So what drives you to share your story? I mean, that's the one
Mm.
that I found really
Mm.
fascinating.
Yeah, so I think what really has driven me to tell my story is to give hope to other survivors
Okay.
and also to encourage other survivors to speak up, because the more survivors that can speak up about these cultic or toxic environments that they grew up in, the more change that can happen in the US regarding this. And the issue really in the US is that children do not have rights in the United States. We don't have a Children's Rights Act in the US. And that's what a lot of us survivors are trying to bring attention to, is that there are children who are born into these cultic groups and they are hidden from society and no one knows about them.
Right. They're not
And
census. They basically don't exist on paper, in other words.
no. And so that's why I think a lot of us survivors, we're trying to get other people to speak up. And I know right now there is a petition online that is going around calling for Congress to pass a Children's Rights Act, which we'll see how that goes. But the more people that speak up, the more change that can happen. And I think it's also survivors sharing their stories, it's so healing to other survivors because they see their story in someone else's.
Mhm.
And it helps validate people's experiences too, make them feel like, oh, they're not crazy, that this is a legitimate response or reaction to this intense upbringing. And it could help people process what they went through too. And really, yeah, so for me, it's about inspiring, encouraging, and uplifting other survivors.
So I'm not trying to throw anyone in your family under the bus with this question, Andrew, but
Mm.
do you still have any dialogue with them? Were they understanding, or have you kind of been
Mm.
exiled, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, it was interesting because when I publicly left, and we can dig into this later, but
Sure.
when I publicly told my story, at that time I was at Bob Jones University, and that's a really strict fundamentalist Christian university in the South for people who aren't familiar. But I was expelled from that university because I publicly told my story of growing up gay and fundamentalist Christianity and the effect it had on me and all the trauma. And then I decided to leave that behind. So of course my parents had to find out that I was expelled and they had to know why. So I called them on the phone, and I was ready to be shunned because our family, we had shunned
Mhm.
another family member when I was younger who publicly came out of the closet too and also publicly left religion. Our parents told us, no one in the family can talk to this person anymore. We can't. We have to ignore them, and hopefully they'll come crawling back and admit they were wrong and come back to the fold or into the faith. Of course, that person never came back. I haven't talked to them in years, but that is what I expected to happen to me, and I was emotionally ready for it, but I was surprised when that didn't happen. My parents actually wanted to try to have a relationship,
Yeah.
and my parents asked me if that's something I wanted to try or not. And, you know, I I wanted to. Honestly, I said, yes, like, I'm fine if y'all can respect boundaries,
Sure.
then we can try to do what we can with this. And we've still been in contact. And I actually did go back to their house for Thanksgiving. There's a lot of work to be done in that area. So much more progress to be made. So it's right now it's very shallow and surface level. Like since I was expelled from that school almost a year ago, like we haven't had any conversations about my upbringing, because when I did tell them about a lot of the damage that was done from that, they just gaslit me.
Sure.
They diminished it, and they tried to psychopathologize me through just saying, "Oh, you're bipolar," which is not true. I've
Right.
been to a doctor and I'm not. So, but
I'm
they
glad you
tried
did
to.
that, because a lot of people, I don't think, seek that truth, when it comes to
Mm,
bipolarism or any
mm,
mental illness.
yeah.
I applaud you
Oh,
for
thank you.
doing that.
Yeah.
So that's a big step. I know it's a small blip in our long conversation.
Yes.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, but after really what I told them was like they basically were demanding that I go on medication. Like they had already decided that I was bipolar, and I was like, I'm not.
Right.
I need to go to therapy. That's what I need. And so, you know, right when I was expelled from that school, the next week I'm like sitting in a therapist's office because I'm like, I have years of shit to work through, and I know I'll be in therapy the rest of my life, and like that's fine. Because like my life mantra is progress, not perfection. I'm not trying to be a perfect human being. I'm just trying to be better and better every day. And there's so much frustration, and really like perfectionism is based so much in shame. It's a shame-based fear. So for me, I'm like, I want to be better than the day I was before, and I don't want this intergenerational trauma to keep going on. Like someone has to stop this.
Absolutely. So, Andrew, whom do you credit most influential in your life? And, in your particular origin story for this Moxie talk, it may not be a positive uh,
Mm,
individual. It could be a
mm,
negative one, but who would that
mm,
be? Could be more than one,
mm.
personal or professional.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I was very isolated growing up. And so, it was basically my parents and like people I knew in the cults and some people I knew through homeschool activities. I mean, there were a lot of negative influences in my life.
Sure.
And one thing my parents always told me was that, there are two things you can learn from people: what to do and what not to do. So I learned a lot about what not to do from that environment. So there was a lot of negative influence in that. But I think what I've learned from my parents, and just seeing the way that they behave and the way they chose to raise me and my brothers, is denying reality.
Hmm.
It's not going to make the pain go away. It's not going to get rid of the elephant in the room. And I
Right.
also learned that just because your parents did something to you doesn't make it right.
Hmm.
Um, they idolize their parents so much, like their parents never did anything wrong in their eyes, which I don't agree with, just seeing that dynamic. But learning that also two things can be true.
Hmm.
You don't have to look at life in a black and white way. You can still love your parent and admit they harmed you or traumatized you. Those two things can be true. And it is okay to admit that and work through that. And so, yeah, I learned, yeah, so to not deny reality and to really work on personal growth in every area of my life, because I saw them use religion to not grow as people at all, to just stay the same and be just satisfied with that. So I think just seeing that motivated me to work on myself as a person to progress. But for a positive influence in my life, I would say, for me, like I had such low self-esteem growing up because I was always being put down by the cults I grew
Sure.
up in, and by my parents a lot. So I had no one in my life to build my self-esteem. So I think really for me later in my teen years, when I finally had like internet access, which it took me a while to get that, but I love the motivational speaker, Lisa Nichols.
Mhm.
She is incredible, and like she really helped me personally through viewing her content and her speeches, that you are your own hero, you are your own rescue. And I feel like that is really like that's the message I feel like of my story, that I had to become my own hero because no one else was going to save me.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that.
Hmm.
That's a range. That question. It's usually
Mm,
someone with a more conventional, for lack of a better word, Andrew,
yeah. Hmm.
origin story or human journey.
Hmm.
It's a teacher, or it's
Yeah.
a grandparent, or it's somebody they
Hmm.
work with, or it's somebody they met at
Hmm.
school. What do you consider to be your biggest professional triumph? And it can be more
Hmm.
than one. Again, it can be personal or professional.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I am very young. I'm only 22
Yeah.
years old, and I have so much ahead of me, and I'm excited for it. But right now, I think the professional triumph for me is that I work for world-renowned cult expert Rachel Bernstein,
Yes.
and I was hired by her to help her with her podcast and social media. This was back in April of this year. But yeah, once I was expelled from Bob Jones University and I left that religious environment, all of my connections were gone.
Right.
So here I am, and thankfully I was able to, just for a little context, I moved in with a family that I had connected with outside of the group while I
Okay.
was at Bob Jones, and that's something I might be able to talk later on, but
Hmm.
that's how I was able to escape that environment, was moving in with a family I connected with in Greenville, South Carolina.
Okay.
But once I left, I moved in with that family, and I'm like, what am I gonna do? Like how, like I have to completely rebuild my network from scratch. And to me, like it was really daunting. And I was like, how am I gonna do this? And podcasting, that has been my way to do it for the almost a year now. I'm going on as many podcasts as I possibly can to share my story and also to connect with other people. And I've made a lot of friends through podcasting too, which has surprised me. And I love it, all the different people that I've met and be able to like to have that real, genuine connection with. But yeah, I was on Rachel's podcast back in February. We recorded it then, and that's how we met. And she really loved the content I was putting out online, and she was like, I would really want to hire you to help me with my social media and help me grow my podcast.
Mhm.
And I was just so honored that she would want me to work for her. And at that point, I was jobless. Like I was unemployed because I've been fired from all the jobs I had at Bob Jones, of course. So I was like, I would love to work for you because, and another reason is that our missions were very similar. We aligned in those values. And then I think it was great that we were able to connect and that I'm able to help the incredible work that she's doing, because she has helped people from over 300 cults throughout her 30-year career so far. She's done so much to help cult survivors and also through her podcast. And I'm really honored to be a part of that.
Well, we're honored that you came on Moxie Talk, and we're still got a lot more to cover. So thank you,
Thank
Andrew,
you. Oh yeah, you're
for
welcome.
on here and reaching out. So I'm curious, what does Andrew Pledger consider to be his biggest life lesson so far?
Yeah, so in my notes, I've written down two, but
Okay.
they're intertwined together. But I would say number one, the hardest life lesson for me to learn as of right now is that it is okay to ask for help.
Mm,
Now, because I didn't have help in the environment I grew up in, I became very ultra independent, where I learned to just never ask for help, never show a sign of need or seeing that as like a sign of weakness. I had to always put on this front that I have everything under control and that I can't. So, and I suffered a lot because of that. And to me, like it makes sense why that's the mindset I took, because there wasn't help. But when I did finally start to see opportunities for help, it was hard. It was really hard to ask and consider that. And I think before I could learn to ask for help, I had to claim my autonomy, and I had to learn that my life is in my hands. Yes, I grew up in this cult that was out of my control, but when I became an adult, I didn't have to stay in it. I didn't have to be a part of it. I finally had the pen to write my own story, because up to that point, my parents had written my life story for me.
Mhm.
And then once I got that pen, it was my decision to rewrite the story and take my life into my own hands. But I am where I am today because I learned to ask for help.
Right.
I'm afraid that I wouldn't be here anymore if I didn't ask for help. And I think that's why it was an important but a hard lesson for me to learn.
Well, the show's called MoxieTalk, and for those that may not know, Moxie is basically courage,
Mm,
face of great adversity, and adversity can either be self-interpretive,
mm-hmm,
or it's self-created, or in this case, it's foisted upon you.
mm-hmm,
But you chose to find the courage to rise above and
mm,
transcend all of that, and that's why
mm,
you're an ideal guest for the show. So
mm.
thank you for everything you've done, and you're definitely a role model for everyone. Hopefully, that watches this program that has dealt with issues that you have
Mm.
dealt with. So the next
Oh,
question I love is, what do you consider to be the biggest risk you've ever taken, Andrew? And do you feel like so far it's paid off? I know as of this Moxie Talk, you're a tender age of 22. I've got two
yeah.
times in you, buddy, plus a few more years. So uh, yes, that is young, and there are a lot of chapters ahead of you. But what do you consider
Mm.
your biggest risk, and did it pay off so far?
Yeah, I think I've already touched on it a little bit, but yeah, the biggest risk that I have taken is publicly sharing my story. And I'll dig into how I did that. But while I was at Bob Jones University, I started, especially it was in my senior year, which was the fall of 2021. So this was a year ago. I started working on a photo series, understanding and digging into religious trauma and the different experiences that I had in this cult and how that affected me. And I expressed it through art photography. And I made the decision that I'm going to share this photo series publicly. And I've shared a few photos with you, and we'll look at that later.
Well,
Um, but I'm going to share it publicly, and I'm going to share my story, because it was like, for me, like the fear of speaking out just was going away, and the pain of staying silent was so much stronger than the fear of speaking out.
mhm.
I could not be silent anymore. And it was in January of this year, 2022, when I actually was interviewed by the author Josh Harris, and he wrote the book I Kissed Dating Goodbye. And this book was very influential in evangelical and fundamentalist circles. It sold 1 million copies worldwide. Like, just that environment just latched onto this book for how to it really influenced purity culture. And for people who don't know what purity culture is, it is just this very strict, extreme interpretation of what sexuality should be. Is very repressive. And so that's just a little overview of that. But this guy, Josh Harris, he actually publicly left Christianity like in 2019, and it caused such an upheaval in the Christian community because so many people loved him and his book and the influence that it had. But when this guy that they saw as a leader in the Christian world admitted that, oh my gosh, like, I apologize for all the harm this book has caused to people, and I apologize for this system of control that I have been a part of and all the harm that it's caused. That caused a lot of upset people. But when that happened, I looked up to him because to me, I'm like, someone publicly admitting that they were wrong about something and they're holding themselves accountable. To me, that is very inspirational and shows a lot of character. And I had never seen any adult figure admit they were wrong, because I was taught growing up that adults are right even when they're wrong. Like, you can't question authority. So
Yeah. Wow.
seeing an
Yeah.
seeing an authority figure. So when I went on his show, and it was nerve-wracking because it was the first time that I was sharing my story, and he was one of my idols, or he is still one of my idols, a person that I look up to. And I, you know, I was surprised that just the words flew really well out of my mouth when I did it, and it was like over, and I was like, oh wow, like it's done. And I knew that interview was gonna change everything, and it did, and I would still do it again because I think my life has been so much better since leaving that toxic, harmful environment.
I mean, for what it's worth, if I didn't know your backstory and we just met casually, at a networking event or what have you, I wouldn't have no feeling or
Mm,
intuitive sense that you've had this much trauma in your life.
mm,
I mean, you seem, I'm not trying to simplify your trauma,
mm.
but you seem very normal the
I got you.
outside in light of what you've been through.
Mm,
Which
mm,
I think again is a testament to your moxie and your courage and your ability
mm,
to stand up for yourself. I'll do a quick tangent. This is my opinion, not yours. But we live in a culture now where victimization is kind of in vogue, and that's not a criticism. It's just an observation. It seems
mhm,
we live in an age right now where that's kind of like if you're not playing the victim, then there's something wrong with you instead of being
mm,
a self initiator or self reliant.
mm,
I grew up in a different era where it was the opposite. You didn't talk about feelings, you didn't talk
mm,
about things.
mhm,
You bucked up and you went on, and neither one's wrong, neither one's right. But I think it's just something I wanted to point out. So the
mm,
next question I want to ask you: what do you consider to be your biggest mistake so far, Andrew, in your human journey?
hmm. Yeah, I would say, my biggest mistake, I guess, so far, and something I'm working on, is spending so much time stressing about the end result and not enjoying the journey, like worrying about the destination and not enjoying the journey. And, I think there are a lot of reasons to why I am so driven to do goals, and that's great. That is great to have goals and reach them. But it's really it causes a lot of unhappiness when you say to yourself, I'm going to be happy when I get this goal.
Right.
Because once you get that goal, there's another goal that I'll be happy when I get this goal. So learning that, you know what, I have these goals still, but I'm going to enjoy the journey and enjoy the present moment too as I work my way up to these different goals, and not put my happiness in it, but
Yeah.
still see worth and value in it, but enjoying that journey, because we only have one life, and we might as well get the best out of it and enjoy every moment that we can.
And as you live longer, you gain the perspective of understanding that, you do need to accept the journey because there's more time spent in the journey than the
Mm-hmm.
destination. And a wise person once told me, family member actually, they're no longer with us, said, those thoughts, that brain, it goes wherever you go. Whether
Mm-hmm.
you live in a world where you came from no money and made a lot of money to, having good health or bad health, or you can name a multiple of
Mm,
circumstances, Andrew. But, those thoughts that you have, in other words, you can't buy happiness is where I'm going
mm-hmm.
basically with that is
Yeah.
just you have to make
Mm-hmm.
your own contentment, your
Mm-hmm.
own happiness. And when you place that on
Mm-hmm.
society or another individual, you're maybe, hopefully not, but more than not, I'm afraid you set yourself up for disappointment when you put
Mm,
expectations on things that are
mm,
beyond your control. So that's
yes.
always been real helpful for me, which is a
Mm-hmm.
great segue into our next question. It's one of my favorite questions in the
Yeah.
Moxie questions. What do you consider to be your best piece of advice ever given to you, Andrew? It can be more than one, personal or professional.
Mm. Yeah, I think I had talked a little bit about this earlier, but like I think what my parents had said, two things you can learn from people: what to do and what not to do. And
Mm-hmm.
that's something I've always considered when I'm meeting different people and different situations. And like I had said, there's a lot of what I learned what not to do
Mm-hmm.
from my background. But I think another great advice I would say that I was given, I would say would probably be that, kind of again, like my whole whole kind of message that you are your own hero. You are your own rescue, of just also like learning that balance of, dependence and independence, of learning again when to ask for help. And, knowing, there are times that, it's okay to take a break from life. That's how I keep my sanity, is there are times where I get overwhelmed. And because that's another thing too, is I felt so much shame about not constantly doing things,
Mhm.
about not constantly. So I think, yeah, some of the greatest advice for me, that it is okay to take a break. And, if you want to help others, you have to help yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, that's without question. It's interesting, a quick aside, and, the interview's about you, obviously. So, but I just want to, it's the human journey is interesting because we come into this world alone.
Mm,
It takes a lot of people to get us here.
yeah.
And we have that one moment where we take our first breath and we're basically alone. And then, regardless of how your last day on earth is, whether it's a tragic ending or a
Hmm.
health decline, you tend to end that sometimes
Hmm.
noticed alone. But everything
Mm,
happens in between. But the two biggest moments, potential
oof.
or definite defining moments we all have, in the beginning and ending of our chapters, you're
Mm,
usually
mm,
alone. And I find that interesting from a higher power standpoint. But
mm-hmm.
what do you consider to be the aha moment for you, Andrew, when you chose this life path or human journey? You can still, at your
Mm,
young age, still very much be involved in it. Um,
mm-hmm.
we're taping this well after we had a global pandemic
Mm,
called COVID-19, because this is,
yeah.
be archived, digitized, and, be around
Mm-hmm.
really forever. Um, so, we've all experienced a global pandemic for the first time in about 4 or 5 generations.
Mm-hmm.
You had kind of talked about, and in my research of you, you really learned a lot about what was going wrong with your life during that
Mm-hmm.
time frame. So maybe it happened then, and I don't want to answer
Mm,
for it.
yeah. I mean, there have definitely been several, I guess, aha moments throughout my life, but I think definitely during the pandemic, honestly, and this didn't last for long, but my mental health was better not being in that toxic religious environment, because
Mhm.
everything shut down. You couldn't go anywhere. So having a break from that psychologically and spiritually abusive environment, and noticing my body and my mind and my thought patterns, and just like how that had changed, it was just that, like you said, that aha moment for me. And it really helped solidify and validate, I guess you would say, the belief that are into the knowing that, oh, this is a harmful and toxic environment, really experiencing that break from it. And I think that happened to a lot of people for different things, having a break from certain things and noticing and just reflecting and being with yourself, which I think a lot of people don't have in their lives. And I think we really do need that time. And there are different ways you can do that. For me, I love to journal. I journal just about every day, just reflecting on my day, reflecting on my emotions. Why am I feeling them? What can am I feeling stressed? How can I just try to emotionally regulate myself to become the best that I can be? But yeah, it was noticing the change and the betterment of my mental health.
Mhm. I love that you say that, because everybody recharges in different
Mm,
ways. As a fellow
mm,
human being, you do it journaling. I disappear into a movie. I watch movies
ooh,
by myself,
yeah.
and it transports my feelings and my
Mm,
mentality. And
yeah.
I have some acting background. That's, again, this isn't about me, but my point is I kind
Mm,
of immerse myself into that.
oh,
Uh,
yeah.
whether it's a series or a movie, and
Mm-hmm.
get lost in it, and it triggers all these emotions, and it kind of
Mm,
takes me away, transports me
yeah.
away from who I
Mm,
am. And I'm a very grounded individual, and feel very confident in my own skin, but I do need that time, like you're saying, to recharge. So I can
mm-hmm.
totally relate to that. This next question is going to be very insightful. What's it like to be you? What's it like to be Andrew Pleasure? What's it like on a given Monday at 3 o'clock when nobody's around and you're quiet and you're editing a podcast for your documentation or what have you?
Yeah, I know, like, it was really hard for me to answer this question,
Sure.
because, in the past, I hated myself so much just from all that experience in this group, and I was basically taught to hate myself, and I remember all the time just wishing to be somebody else.
Mhm.
And to get to the point where I actually love who I am, and I'm now glad to be at the point where I would say I would never want to trade places with anyone. I would never want to be anyone else. And I guess, what it's like to be Andrew Pledger, it's complicated.
Yeah, I like that answer. I
It's
totally get what
com
you're saying. Yeah.
it's so complicated right now because I am so grateful for the growth that I've done so far, but I know there's so much ahead of me and so much more breakthroughs that I'm going to have in therapy. But I would say it's complicated, it's empowering, it's inspiring. Sometimes it is lonely, honestly, at times. And I've tried my best in my life. I do have a good community of people, but it's really hard when you're doing all of this inner work and you see your family not healing or moving forward with you, to see them stay behind. I
Mhm.
think that has been really hard for me to see that, but it is okay because I'm gonna keep going forward and try to be the best person that I can be.
What do you feel, Andrew, that people get wrong about you? In other words, do you feel misunderstood? I think there's a human
Mm,
condition element to all of us that we have
yeah.
that at times, either
Mm,
for long periods or a quick moment during a day, an
mm,
interaction with a fellow human being. I know that I've felt misunderstood many times in my life. I've
mm,
lived a lot longer than you have so far.
mm,
Do you ever
yeah.
feel misunderstood?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I feel like being misunderstood, it's such like a universal feeling, and we all feel misunderstood for different reasons. But yeah, growing up, I always felt misunderstood. And, it was great to finally speak out and tell my story. But yes, there are still moments where I feel I am misunderstood a lot. And I feel like the area in which I'm misunderstood is that people think that I hate religion, all
Mm.
religion, period. That's where I think a lot of people misunderstand me, which is not true. Um, I mean, I would say probably in the beginning of my journey of sharing my story, there were feelings of animosity towards our religion, but that has greatly subsided a lot. And I do see the value in healthy religion. And I had to get out of my own head or my own perspective of religion. And I had to learn from other people, okay, well, what is this to you? Trying to understand. So I think that what most people get misunderstand, they think I hate religion, which that's not true. I hate toxic religion. I hate abusive systems of control, but I don't hate religion in general. And I'm all for healthy religion and healthy spirituality.
Well, that's an understandable reaction as an outside human, if you will, observing you,
Yeah.
uh, knowing that you made such a public and staunch
Yeah.
expedition or whatever term you want to use from the IFB. I think
Hmm.
that's a logical conclusion a person that didn't know you would make. And I'm
Mm,
glad that you're intellectual and mature enough
mm,
to see that and perceive
mm,
that and understand it. So I think it's
mm,
kudos to you, my friend, that you've been able to
mm,
do that. The next question I want to ask you along those lines is, and it's a pretty loaded question, and it's kind of an organic one coming off, segueing off of this last moment of conversation. But do you consider yourself to be, atheist, agnostic? Are you still searching? Are you spiritual? I mean, because you've had such a staunch,
mm.
I use the word indoctrination into a
Yeah.
certain way and belief of looking at the world. Where are you now? If I may ask.
Yeah, I mean, I
No long answer.
I'll just start with this. I would say I am agnostic
Okay.
and I'm open to the idea of spirituality, and it is something I'm personally exploring.
Mhm.
I do have my own spiritual life, and it's a lot different than what other people think of spirituality, and it's still changing for me. I think I don't want to say to people I believe this, and this, because I don't think my beliefs are going to be the same a week from now, or a month from now, or a year. I think spiritual growth and growth as a human being means your beliefs are always going to be changing. But at this point in my life, I'll just say agnostic, because I do believe in some kind of higher power. I don't know if it's personal or not. I don't know if it's also something that is inside of me and inside of everyone else. That's something that I'm considering. Maybe it's just an energy that exists everywhere across the universe, that is God, and maybe it interacts, and maybe I don't know. But it's something I'm open to the idea of, and I do believe in some kind of higher power. And that does give me, I think, some comfort believing in that. And for the environment I grew up in, it's very different, because they think they have the answer for everything. And for me, it's like, I believe in higher power, but I don't know what it is. And like, I don't know if this higher power has a purpose for me, but I've just taken my own autonomy and I'm using my life for a purpose. But yeah, spirituality is a big part of my life, and the specifics of it I keep private. But I think for anyone, who has a negative view of spirituality, I totally get that. Absolutely. But to me, what is great about spirituality is doing that inner work,
Sure.
reflecting. And to me, that's why I think it's so helpful and so powerful.
Well, for what it's worth, I'm a lifelong cradle to grave Episcopalian, which is kind of Catholic light. And I always tell people I'm an Episcopalian, but if I'm having a bad day, I'm agnostic.
I got you.
Because I'm kind of that way too. I'm like, none of us really, quick aside, none of us knows how we got here. We all have beliefs, and none of us really knows where we're going, but yet we're all here on this little rock,
Yeah.
in the middle of nowhere, and we all have the power of reason. But that's not the purpose of the show. So I'll move on. Can you?
I got you.
So Andrew, love this next question. Our show used to be more focused on leadership individuals. Now it's got leaders and role models. I consider you to be more of a role model, inspirational figure. But can you define leadership in one word in the great English lexicon, as I always like to say, Andrew? It can be more than one word. It can be a phrase. It can be personal or professional. So
yeah, I mean, I would say risk would be, because it's what I've done. I took a huge risk in publicly telling my story, and I wouldn't be who I am today if I didn't learn to take that risk and to continue taking risks, because taking a risk means you have to go outside of your comfort zone. And if you stay in your comfort zone, you're not going to grow as a human being, and you're not going to grow as a person. So I think risk is so important, because that means going out of your comfort zone, going into the unknown, which a lot of us are scared of. And it is scary. And it takes that courage really to do it. And I think courage is another great word for leadership too. But to me, yeah, risk is a really defining word, I think, for leadership or being a role model.
Yeah, well, let me ask you another question. It's kind of an organic one as well, and it's a simple yes or no. You're welcome to elaborate. You don't have to. I would assume there was a lot of mental threatening of you leaving. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but were you ever physically threatened when you chose to leave?
Yeah, it's interesting, because literally leaving, I did it publicly at that moment. And growing up, I had been indoctrinated, of course, to not leave. It's called phobia indoctrination. You're basically indoctrinated that if you leave, all these terrible things will happen to you. You'll become an addict. You'll be homeless. God will curse you. So I was already so scared of leaving. So I had heard these messages growing up over and over again to keep me scared in the group. But once I publicly came out and I told my story, the silence was deafening. This silence from a lot of people was just, I was surprised by it, honestly. And to me, I guess that's better than them attacking me online or saying this, and this. And I think, since my family, they had learned from experience that shunning someone or, threatening that, if you don't do this, then we'll punish you for this reason. They learned from the shunning that it didn't work and it causes more harm than good. But yeah, I mean, no one threatened me. And, I know when I was expelled from Bob Jones, there were a few adults at that school who basically did a smear campaign about me. I don't know all that went down with that. I just heard about it. And I'm like, whatever, like that says more about them than it does about me.
I would agree.
And and I don't want to hear that. So I don't know what was exactly done, but I just know that happened.
Well, this is a good time to bring up another organic question. Could you define religious trauma for the average person that has no history with religious adults' personal history? Can you
Yes.
define it for the audience with a few words or a couple paragraphs or a phrase?
Got you. Yeah, I mean, first, I guess I want to quickly define what trauma is. And this is a very simplified definition. So, trauma happens when something is too much and too fast, and our nervous systems and our psyche cannot process what is happening. So, for example, getting in a car wreck.
Right.
That is a traumatic experience, most definitely. And that's something that happens. It's too much, too fast, and it's overwhelming your nervous system. And because of that incident, the emotional distinction made and that high charge of energy in your body, it's stuck in your body. Every time you drive by that place where you had a wreck, that memory is going to come back up because it's your mind and body trying to protect you from that happening again. Is adaptive. And it's trying to help us. And there are times, though, where it gets too much. And these traumatic thing that happens, it causes really awful mental health symptoms because that trauma or that energy is trapped in our bodies and we have to process it and release it so we can really stop having these triggers and these PTSD symptoms. And for religious trauma, it is trauma that happens in religious context, and religion has a high influence on this. But religious trauma, it arises in a response to a traumatic or stressful religious experience. And it is a common experience shared among many people who have escaped cults, fundamentalist religious groups, abusive religious settings, or other painful experiences with religion. And religious trauma is comparable to complex PTSD. And what that means is, PTSD happens from one very big traumatic incident. Complex PTSD is just so many traumatic incidences on top of the other. It's kind of like a snowball rolling down a hill, it goes building and building and building. And so there are a lot of symptoms of religious trauma. So like confusing thoughts, reduced ability to think, negative beliefs about yourself and others, depression, anxiety, grief, lack of emotional regulation, complex PTSD, flashbacks, nightmares, dissociation, just feeling isolated or feeling like you don't belong anywhere. And so, very common things that you struggle with are black and white thinking, irrational beliefs, you can't trust yourself, low self-esteem, struggle with relationships and self-expression. And these are just a long list of things that happen because of religion, toxic religion, traumatizing people. Now, for example, in the environment that I grew up in, there was a lot of fear-based messages. So for me, like the doctrine of hell and the way it was taught and the way it was used to really abuse and manipulate was really traumatizing. I struggle with nightmares a lot in my childhood, and I struggle with sleeping, and I still struggle with sleep at times to this day. And that's something I'm working through a lot in therapy, of like learning to regulate my nervous system. But and the thing is, these traumatic things in these religious environments happen over and over again. And what makes it different from other trauma is that you have a higher or belief in a higher power involved. So this idea of God is really used against people, and it really affects your view of a higher power, because religion and spirituality can be such a wonderful thing for people. But with religious trauma, it cuts you off from that feeling of comfort from that. You're isolated. You're like, there is this angry God. There is this hateful God, and he wants to do all these terrible things to me. And also it's really that association. So many traumatic incidences with religion, you'll have a negative view of a concept of God and religion and spirituality. And because of that association, like I'm still working through a lot of triggers. Like crosses trigger me a lot, churches trigger me so much, and there's certain language that people use a lot in the South that's a part of Christianity, and it brings me back to those moments. And I know that was a longer definition than you wanted,
Sure.
but
No, I love it.
that's
That's
that
great.
definition.
No, very helpful. Well,
Yeah.
Andrew, what do you consider to be your why? In other words, what motivates you?
Yeah, and like this is interesting because when I left toxic religion, I really tried to understand, what can healthy religion, what does it provide for me as a person, or what are human needs that I have that I can find to reach on my own outside of the religion. And so for me, purpose is so important to really what I do. I am so motivated by purpose, and my purpose is really giving hope to other survivors and inspiring them. And I have dedicated my life to helping religious trauma survivors by number one, I want to become a therapist, and I also want to become a psychologist because there needs to be a lot more research in religious trauma. So I am motivated, because of what I went through and also what a lot of other people went through. I am driven by the purpose to inspire and also help people work through religious trauma.
Mhm. In my research of you, and I want to ask this question, then we're going to pop up some pictures from your life on the monitor behind me. But you had
Mhm.
mentioned that you had a family that was very helpful to you
Mm.
in Greenville, South Carolina. Could you speak to them? You don't need to name their names, but how were they able to be helpful for you and continue to be?
Mm. Yeah, so I met them at an affirming church in Greenville, South Carolina, and it was really surprising to me because they did not identify as Christians,
Mhm.
but they're the most loving people that I've ever met, the most kind. And to me, that caused a lot of cognitive dissonance because in the IFB, if you weren't a Christian or you didn't conform to those doctrines, you were evil, you were bad. But to see an example of that not being true, that really did make me question. But they, if I would have never met them, I don't think I would be alive anymore, honestly.
Mhm.
Because while I was at Bob Jones University and I was brought to the point of suicide, and something inside of me, that last ounce of hope maybe, caused me to like take that step forward of claiming my autonomy,
Mhm.
of trying to find that help. So once, I was able to connect with them, you know, uh, they were the family that I really needed, quite honestly. Um, True, like acceptance from them was so important. It was something I never felt in the family or experienced in the family I grew up in. And being able to be myself around them and to not feel judgment, and just to have someone love and care about you and not expect anything in return. That was so powerful to me. And they've been so influential in my life of continuing that journey of being my best self, trying to care for as many people as I can and to love everyone,
Mhm.
and critically think about things and to question everything, and learning that I have goodness inside of me. I don't have to conform to a specific belief or doctrine in religion to have that's already inside of me.
Mhm. I like that. So, Andrew, this is one of my favorite parts of the Moxie Talk. We're going to go into kind of what I would like to call your life in pictures.
Mm.
Kind of go through your the arc of your life. You know, some people, we have a great deal of pictures. In your case, we don't have that many. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to stand up here, let you speak to the ones that come up on the monitor. And this first one looks like you're doing a podcast. It's called This Little Light of Mine. Trauma is trauma.
Yes. Yeah. This picture is really important to me, and really because of the story behind it. There are many interviews that I've done, and it was one of my favorites because of it was really like really digging into depth into my story and having a compassionate person to also help guide me as I told that story. And like, you know, after that interview, like I cried my eyes out, honestly.
Sure.
Because I think it's also was very validating, because there was still that self-blame or that inner critic. But I think it helped, doing that interview really helped me have so much self-compassion for myself as a person and what I went through.
So this next one is you with Rachel on indoctrination. What was that like? Explain that for the audience. You kind of touched upon it.
Yes, yeah. So like I had said earlier, we had connected because I had reached out to her to go on her podcast, and I was so honored that she wanted me to work for her, because, you know, at that point I was unemployed, and to have such an influential person want me to work for them like this, it is a big part of my story, because you know, all the time and effort I was putting into connecting with people, I was finally just seeing the fruition of that. And it was just really great. And, you know, I think she's a great mentor. And, you know, I think I'll definitely, as I continue on my journey of schooling and digging into cult education more to help other religious trauma and cult survivors, she'll be a big influence in that area. And she is a big influence in my life now, and the work that she is doing. And that picture is also, I love it because Rachel Bernstein never shared her personal story publicly, and for the first time she did it on my podcast.
Wow.
So I
That's
was
awesome. That's great.
I was very honored to have her share her story for the first time on my podcast, and it was something I tried to get her to do for a while, because no one ever heard her story. She had kept it secretive about, like, because people are curious, like, what got you into becoming a cult expert? Like, why?
It's a good
And
point. Something they
so
teach
for
in school.
yeah, so for anyone listening, like, you know, I'm sure you'll link my podcast, but go check out that episode with Rachel Bernstein if anyone's curious about her story in her podcast.
In this next picture, you blacked out the faces to the left of you. But what's going on here in this picture? There's three individuals.
Yeah, so this is an old picture that I found of me and my brothers in the IFB cult. And when I found it, I was just overcome or really flooded with so many emotions, because it brought me back, like, mentally and emotionally to that time period.
Yeah.
And I could see so much pain
Yeah.
in my eyes
Mm-hmm.
when I saw the picture. And it also, you know, part of me just wanted to delete it and never look at it again. but it made me see that, look at how far you've come as a
Right.
person. And so I think it is a hard picture for me to see, but I think it does for me help me to see my growth.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, and I understand why you're blacking out their faces. So this is
Yeah.
the logo for the Indoctrination podcast. I thought
Mm.
maybe you could take a moment, speak to what that's about. You know, maybe if you had any insight into why the logo is the way it is. Maybe it was Rachel, maybe, since it's her podcast and work with her. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I definitely wanted any podcast that I'm on or interview that I do, I always give a shout out to Rachel and her podcast Indoctrination. because I love the work that she is doing, and she has helped so many people. But yeah, the indoctrination podcast, like I said earlier, working for Rachel and being a part of the team has been so influential in my life. And just listening to her podcast has helped me learn so much about myself and the kind of environment that I grew up in, and helping me process that. I mean, to me, I see her podcast as free therapy for me.
Sure.
um,
No,
um,
I get it. I like
so, and I think people should definitely check out her podcast
it.
and
This is
see
where
the work
you're,
that she's doing.
this next picture is basically where you were her guest, which led to you becoming an employee. So that's pretty cool. Pretty cool.
Yes.
Anything you want to add on this one? I think we've kind of covered.
I mean, yeah, I think, I guess I would say, I think you wanted me to talk about the logo a little bit,
Sure.
but I did not create the logo. She's been doing her podcast since I think 2017 or 18.
Okay.
And I think, the logo just kind of visually represents mind control, honestly. And that's kind of what the podcast is about. The podcast covers cults, manipulators, and systems of control, and
Mhm.
how to undo that indoctrination through these different systems.
I got you. Appreciate you sharing that. Now, this
Mhm.
next picture coming up, it's got a key and a keyhole. It's in a book. There's an image
Mhm.
of it looking down on it. Looks like a
Mhm.
man. I don't believe that's you in the picture. But what is that?
Yeah, so I picked several photos from my photo series. Not the whole series that I sent to you, but they were some of my favorite photos from the series I picked. Because for the context of this photo, my photo series depicts a person that is locked away in a room,
Mhm.
and all they have is religion.
Ah,
And it talks, the whole series is this person trying to use religion to overcome their problems, but their mental health is getting worse. And so throughout this series, this individual has a key around their neck and a necklace, and they're locked in a room.
no.
And so the whole point of this photo series was to portray my story of religious trauma, but also show my growth to the point of realizing that I am my own hero. I have the answer, or I have the key to my problems or the situation. So this key, it represents autonomy,
Okay.
really. That's what it represents. And so this person, or in this series, I'm discovering, oh my gosh, like, I don't have to suffer in silence. I don't have to be in this environment. I can have my own autonomy, and I can walk away.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of this whole, like, really, I guess it was a hero's journey of my internal hero's journey of coming to that point to when I, as an adult, to walk away and claim my autonomy and my identity.
So I love this quote that you spoke to. I'll read it for the audience, and then you can speak to it. You may know it by heart, but you don't, which is fine. Um, I found this on the internet, and I thought it really kind of captured what we're doing and why you're on the show as a guest. It's from This Little Light of Mine podcast. This is your quote. It's so awful to suffer constantly, 24/7. You don't know what's wrong. You don't know what's going on. What can I do to fix this pain, this suffering? Growing up, I was told in the church, quote, just read your Bible and pray, unquote, and you'll be fine. I was told that mental illness was a sin. I thought that was very powerful. I don't know if you want to elaborate on any of that.
Yeah, yeah. I love that interview, This Little Light of Mine, so much, but I think that quote shows all the gaslighting and the blame that happens when a cult's formula doesn't work for you. You're just suffering, and you're told to do the same thing over and over, and it's really insanity.
Mhm.
And it's really sad how mental illness is really demonized in the IFB cults, there's so much shame around it. And in that interview, like, I talked a lot about religious trauma and also being gay and that environment and the influence that had being in that environment and the trauma. But I had to get to a point where, what, these answers aren't working. Again, like claiming that autonomy and seeking healing elsewhere. And it was hard to break out of that because it's scary to leave a system that tells you they have the answer, that they have everything, but it wasn't working. There were deeper issues that were going on, and they were using spirituality to bypass that, to ignore those issues. So yeah, it was hard, but I had to, deconstruct and throw away that belief system.
Well, I appreciate you sharing those pictures with us, Andrew, and that
Hmm.
includes the part of the life and fix part of the Moxie Talk. This next question I find kind of interesting. What was, if someone were to ask you, what is the single most positive contribution you made to humanity so far in your life? What might that be? It's a real mouthful, meaty question. So,
So you're saying right now in this point in my life,
or up,
or
or including your entire life. It could be,
yeah.
it may have already happened and you're building on it, or you may believe it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, I mean, kind of like my life mantra is that progress, not perfection. Like, there are a lot of things that I want to do, and one big positive thing that I know I will accomplish because I'm working on it now, but um is to publish a memoir.
Mhm.
And to me, like, it's not just any kind of just my story.
Okay.
It's my story, but also psychology, incorporating psychology, which I've been working on my memoir for several years now, and I'm already talking to different publishers. But I want to leave behind my journey, my story, but also my journey of healing through therapy and psychology. Because there's not, right now, we really don't have a specific therapy modality to deal with religious trauma or how to work through it. It's a lot of trial and error
Right.
that is going on as we're helping people heal from religious trauma. So for me, like, I don't see it as like, this is how you heal from religious trauma. I see it as learn from my journey. This is, and take what you can of my journey from healing. And I hope that the memoir will influence and really help people like heal. And I hope it will validate their own experiences and just make their journey easier if it can, so they don't have to suffer so much.
So this next question I really liked, and I think it's very applicable to your origin story, the journey you're on, and will continue to be on the rest of your life.
Mm,
What do you do when things get you down? What keeps you motivated? When
mm,
days are tough, when nobody's looking. We all have them. It's a human
yeah.
condition
Mm,
question. Um,
yeah.
we have good days and bad days, but in your particular
Mhm.
case, and I'm just going to throw this out here. Do you ever have days where you just kind of feel like, you know what, I'm just gonna go back to my family. This is too much effort. I'm gonna, in essence, chuck it all and go back. And then something tells you, and I don't want to answer for you, and you're like, no, I'm staying the course. I'm this far along. I'm gonna keep on keeping on.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like you said, it's a universal thing to feel that discouragement and have that lack of motivation
Mhm.
at times. And I would say for me personally, there are some days, obviously, that I am down and, you know, still healing trauma. There are a lot of triggers happen and, experiencing complex PTSD
Sure.
and having to learn to self-regulate and understand and work through the thought process of like why that happened, or how can I work through this with my therapist. But for me, I think getting through those hard days and those hard emotions is just number one, accepting those hard feelings. Be like, you know what, I am feeling this emotion
Mhm.
and that is okay. But also realizing that, oh, this is not forever. This will pass. So like, you know, the emotion of like, or experience of permanence, like, it's easy to get caught up in like, oh, this is never gonna end.
Right.
And that's something I've had to learn even though it might not feel like it, I have to cognitively be like, this is not forever. And if I am having a bad day, I definitely like in my journal, like I do a mental health check of like, is this hard feeling and this lack of motivation, is this my body or mind communicating to me that I need to rest? Do I need to take care of my mental health? Or so to me, that's why I journal a lot. So I can minimize those harder emotions and those hard, obviously I can't avoid them altogether, but I try to I try to arrange my life in a way that I'm trying to be a balanced individual to take care of my, my mental health, my physical health, my spiritual health, and
Mhm.
just and that, all that aspect of that. But on those days, yeah, I know that it's not forever, and I try to journal to work through those. And usually like I take time to rest, because for me that's usually what that means for me when I have that,
Sure.
that I've been overworking myself and overwhelming myself, and my body and mind is communicating me and say you need to rest. So I don't take that lightly. So I do try to take breaks and rest when I can.
Very smart, as I'm older than you, to do that. It all builds on itself as you get
Mhm.
older. So that's very
Yeah.
wise and
Mhm.
mature of you to do that. This next question is a mouthful question, and I appreciate you sending me your response to it. But could you describe in detail a particular scenario or incidents where you utilized your own philosophy on leadership, Andrew? It can be more than one, personal or professional.
Mm. Yeah, so I would say that an incident in my personal life where I utilized my own leadership style, and to me, like it's kind of like a Christianese phrase, but like practicing what you preach, I guess you would
Right, right.
say.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think it was escaping the cult that I grew up in and telling my story. And like I value authenticity, I value courage, and I value personal growth. Those are my values. But for me, that was like the first time to actually publicly and also with my life follow those values.
Mhm,
And to me, that was a really hard thing to do. But I've never regretted being true to myself and seeking what is healthiest for me.
mhm. I appreciate you sharing that. And, I still marvel at your authenticity and the
Mm,
mental obstacles you've overcome to be who
mm.
you are at such a young age. I think it's phenomenal.
Oh, thank
This
you.
next question is I'm really curious to see, what does Andrew Pleasure consider to be his biggest pet peeve? I love this. This can be a fun question or a serious qualify it, but what is your biggest pet peeve?
Yeah,
Personal, professional, it could be more than one. Excuse me.
yeah, I would say a pet peeve I've always had are slow walkers.
I haven't had that to that question before. That answer, I love it.
And it's funny because I experienced that a lot at college because I was always being in a rush. And I think I did need to learn to slow down, honestly. I was always stressing myself out, but another pet peeve that I've really discovered lately, and especially like in our political climate we're in, I think my biggest pet peeve is when people respond without listening.
Hmm, hmm.
Um,
Very common in today's world. Yeah.
it is, and it really honestly pisses me off a lot. Like,
Yeah.
to be blunt, like it's something that's so frustrating as I've gotten older. I'm like just listen, like don't respond. Like,
What is Rachel Bernstein like? I mean, obviously, you all had an affinity for each other. To be clear again, she's the founder of the Indoctrination podcast. You work with her now. You were
mm,
on her show. That's how y'all met. What's she like? What's it like?
mm, yeah, Rachel Bernstein is the most humble human being I have ever met. I did not realize all of her accomplishments until, she reached out again to hire me. And I started to dig more into her life, and I didn't realize all the TV appearances she had been on, all the documentaries she had been on, all the like famous people she had worked with, because I
Sure.
would have never guessed it, because she's just such a humble human being. And it's so incredible to me because like again, this Christianese phrase, but like she practices what she preaches.
Uh,
Like
right.
she displays who she says she is. And like I said, like she is so humble,
Mhm.
and she is just all about equality, genuinely about equality, because the more she makes, and she has told me this, and her other employees, that she's like, the more I make, the more I want to pay y'all, the more I want to spread and like to give to y'all. So to me, like, that striving for equality, and like it is interesting because like having her as a boss, I don't see her as like someone looking down on me. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? Like we're all on the team collaborating together, trying to make the best podcast, try to have the best social media presence that we can. But yeah, it's so incredible working for her.
I love that. I appreciate you sharing that.
Mm.
If someone were to ask you, what does Andrew Pleasure stand for? What might you tell them? Not what they perceive you to be or what they consider, but what do you stand for?
Mm. Yeah, so I think these are a lot of common themes that I've talked about in my story, but things that I stand for courage, I stand for vulnerability, compassion, authenticity, and really like change, like
Mhm.
personal change. These are a lot of things that I stand for. And what I'm seeing, when I think hopefully will become better, is that we can't we can't ignore emotions or mental health issues, but we also can't let them define us either. Kind of like what you were talking about earlier, that victimization mindset. I've always tried to have a growth mindset that yes, I experience all these trauma and all these things, but I can move forward, and I am seeking healing. And it's okay if that takes me the rest of my life, but as long as I'm going forward, I think that is always what is best.
That's great. So, Andrew, I'm really curious on this next question. Do you think religious cults are different today in 21st century America than when you first came into them? I know you're not that old. You're roughly 22 at the time of this podcast. Again, you've got many years ahead of you. Do
Mm.
you feel like they're better, worse, the same? Are there more of them? Are there less of them than when you first came in contact with them against your choice or
Mm.
own will?
Yeah, it's interesting because cult, number one, it is a spectrum term. Not all
Sure,
cults
sure.
are the same, and they do exist on a spectrum. But I would say cults have always been an issue, and they'll always be around.
Mm.
And that is why it is so important to spread education. But I think they have been increasing
Okay.
because of the internet. I would say that there are so many online cults. I mean, I was almost recruited into an online cult, actually, as I was deconstructing.
Wow.
Um,
Wow, man. That's interesting. No, I'll quick aside. I mean, we've got some more questions here, but I mean, I think that's fascinating because here you are finding the courage, the authenticity, the honesty with yourself, the self deprecation or whatever, and you're deconstructing the term you use.
yeah.
And then you find, again, I don't want to put words or feelings in your mouth, but you feel this pull to go back to an online cult where you don't even have
Yes.
a physical connection. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah,
On
and
some levels. Excuse me. Go
it's
ahead.
interesting because I've never publicly said that. It is something I wanted to address in the future, but here we
Sure.
are now. I'm going to talk about it, but
I appreciate it. Thank you.
it's so common to cult hop, to leave a cult and go through a different cult. And that is why, again, doing the work of cult recovery and cult education is so important to stop that from happening, because there are so many cults out there and people that want you and will recruit you into their cult, and it's hard to see at first. And
Mhm.
for me, thankfully, I was able to see red flags that was similar to the cult that I grew up in, that I was like, it fed. It was a cult. It's called Hyperianism. That was the cult that
Mhm.
I was almost, or the philosophy of that cult I was almost recruited into. But there's a cult that is attractive to anyone. Like, there are all kinds of niche cults that will attract to very specific people. So the cult I was almost recruited into, it seemed from from what it looked like that they were all about like being intellectual and questioning, and that seemed great to me. But
Mhm.
then again, they claimed to have the truth and the answer, and we need to spread Hyperianism, and we needed to buy these books, and we needed to. And I was like, this is some multi-level marketing shit and culty
Yeah, I don't mean
things.
to laugh, but that's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah. Wow.
And and I'm glad I was able to see those red flags. But again, like, it's so attractive, that black and white thinking that we have the answer, we have the way, just listen to us, turn
Mhm.
off your brain. It's very tempting, and it's very comforting to be given all the answers, and it's very easy to not think for yourself.
Sure.
Very easy to do. So for
Mhm.
me, like, I'm trying to live my life where I do question, and I do, like, I know critical thinking skills growing up in a cult, like, they are like non-existent.
Really.
So working those gears and stretching those brain muscles are there's something I'm also working on.
Mhm.
A lot of like engaging that critical thinking. But like I would say, the internet has caused so many cults to flourish online and recruit different people. And I think the tactics have, and how they recruit people have probably changed, but like, the dynamics of a cult, they're all the same. And that is something that I've learned through the indoctrination podcast, of hearing story after story after story. Yes, these cults might have different beliefs, but the way they run and the way they recruit people is basically the same. And I know people probably want to know a little bit about the dynamics of a cult, so I'll dig quickly into it. So a lot of them, they tell you that they have the answer and it's the only way. That's very common. You have to follow their rules, and if you don't, you get punishment in some kind of form or way, or you're held accountable for that. And there's always like demonization of people who don't believe, the us versus them um mindset. And like, those are a few markers. There's so much more I could dig into, but I'm not, because I know we're running out of time. But that's a little
I
that's
appreciate
just the
you
answer.
sharing that. So
Yeah.
this next question is a real light and airy one because of the topic matter we've been focused
Mhm.
on primarily this evening, for the Moxie talk. But if you had 2 weeks right today, I guess in this case, Rachel said, get lost. We haven't even spoken about the fact that you're a full time college student as well, and you can speak to that maybe in this answer if you want. But you've got 14 calendar days, 10
Mhm.
business days.
Yeah.
Money's no object, so don't let that be an obstacle. You ideally don't take technology with you. Where do you go? What do you
Mm.
do? Who do you take
Mm.
with you? Your
Yeah, I mean, I love that you said no technology, because that was actually a part of my answer. Because technology it's so distracting, and it can be so stressful and keep us from the present. But what I would say, quite honestly, is, for genuinely what I would do, I would go off, probably, um in a like an extremely fancy cabin in
Mhm.
the mountains. I would go by myself,
Okay.
and I would just take a bunch of books and just catch up on a lot of reading that I read all the time anyways. But having that opportunity to read every day a lot, like for hours, to be great. And like, also being in nature, taking that time to rest and reflect and recharge. And because I've always loved nature, it's always refreshed me, of having that time to not worry about necessarily getting anything accomplished, just being, just being human, and enjoying nature and life, and expanding my mind through reading.
I appreciate your honesty on that. That's a pretty cool answer. So you'd be all alone to your own thoughts
Yes.
out in nature, basically.
Yes.
Would it be wintertime, summertime, fall? What would it be? You have
I would
dark-
say like early fall, because I've always loved the fall weather. And like, when the leaves change in the mountains, especially the Blue Ridge Parkway, oh my gosh, like, it is so beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think I love the fall air, the coolness of it too.
It's great. So this next question, this is one of my personal favorites, and then we'll wrap with our final signature question. If you could have dinner with anyone, Andrew, living or deceased,
Mm,
it can be famous, nobody knows them. It can be a
mm,
family member. It can be
yeah.
somebody that isn't well known to people. Like I said,
Mm.
what kind of dinner would it be? Would it be a buffet? Would it be a sit down? Would it be you cook the meal? Would there be liquor or no liquor? What kind of vibe would it be like?
Mm.
The answer is all yours.
I got you. Yeah, I think the person that I would want to have dinner with,
Mhm.
and this is honestly a very easy question for me to answer in my notes.
Sure.
But I would sit down to eat with Carl Jung.
Okay.
And for people who aren't familiar, he died in the early 60s, but he was a psychologist and a philosopher.
Mm.
And before I dig into the why, I'll talk about, I guess, what kind of dinner I would like it to be. I think for me, it would be a really fancy restaurant that we booked out and there was no one else there.
Oh,
No one
wow.
else was there.
Never
No
had
one
an
else.
answer like that to that question.
No one else would be there. We have the whole restaurant to ourselves. We're enjoying wine, and I've never been to a really fancy restaurant, so I don't know what I would eat. It would be very bougie, obviously, but
Yeah, I love that. That's
and
cool.
because for me, I hate loud environments. It has to be a calm environment for me. But yeah, being alone in that restaurant with no one in it. And, Carl Jung, he's someone that I discovered a year ago.
Mm.
And what attracted me to him is that his quest for answers to difficult questions, not being satisfied with the answers religion gave him, but still being open also to spirituality, but
Mhm.
wanting to explore that open-mindedness he had.
Mhm.
I think what attracted me, and his search for the answers of life and humanity through psychology and also our psyche. And so he was passionate about reinterpreting and transforming religion to adapt it in our modern age because he saw the good that it could help people to grow.
Mhm.
And that was something that attracted me because I was like, I had seen religion stifle people's toxic religion. So I'm like, you
Sure.
know what? Like, maybe it is possible that there's approach to religion we can take where all areas of our life where it grows. And that's what healthy religion should do. All areas of your life should grow.
Mhm.
And he wanted humanity to learn to integrate every part of themselves, the parts they see as light and dark, to become whole human beings psychologically.
Mhm.
And just, I think honestly, what I would talk to him about, because he had a lot of ideas of like mythology, religion, psychology, and theology, all these different things.
Mhm.
And he was just so groundbreaking and so influential. I think I would really ask him, like, what would you wish you could have studied more or researched more?
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
he's so influential. There's a whole area of psychology dedicated to him. There's Jungian psychology. There are Jungian psychologists continuing his work. So I
Mhm.
think I would ask him, like, what, which of course, like, I'm sure he could have spent hundreds of years if he could
Sure.
have that time working on things. So I think I would ask him what you wish you would have studied or learned more.
So would it be a vegan dinner, omnivore with meat? Would it be liquor or no liquor? I'm just trying to get a little more insight.
Ooh, got you. Yeah, I think definitely meat. Like,
Okay.
I would say like a really like fancy steak probably or something like that.
Okay. Cool. So no wine, no.
Maybe some wine. Why not?
Okay.
Like,
All right.
yeah,
Well, I appreciate that. I'm trying to visualize in my mind what that would look like. You get two
yeah,
seated at a table, and I think in this case being served, and the rest of the restaurant is entirely empty. So that's pretty cool
yes,
vibe. I think you definitely get a lot covered. You wouldn't have the distractions, so that's pretty
no,
good. So this next question I love. It's our signature question. We've asked it of all 383 guests that have been
mm,
on the program over the last 17 years as of this taping tonight. So here goes, and I'm curious to see your answer. God forbid, Andrew, we're in our private spaces. We're doing a virtual, we're not literally in the same room, but tonight's your last day on earth. For whatever reason, you don't wake up tomorrow morning or something happens right after this taping. How do you want to be remembered by, friends and family and people that you've touched along the way? How do you want to be remembered?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. And it's kind of morbid, I guess, but death is something I do think about a lot.
Okay.
That's just kind of a part, I guess, of my personality as an INFJ, like that focusing on the future and purpose. But I think it's interesting that you mentioned family. I don't think my family will ever think highly of me or really try to get to know me, honestly, because they don't know me. But I think what I want to be remembered from people that I've met along life in this journey who have been able to truly hear my story and really get to know me and understand what I do and why I do it. I think I want to be remembered as really a courageous individual who spoke up and didn't stay silent and was passionate about helping others and did everything they could to make an impact in people's lives. And I think I want to be a person who's remembered, really someone who values people over dogma, someone who, one of my phrases that I say is like, every day I choose humanity over dogma. I think people matter so much more than a lot of these religious dogma or hateful beliefs. Like, let's really learn and love one another instead of demonizing each other with dogma of any kind. And, I think I want to be remembered as a person, again, that language, a person who practiced what they preached. What I showed on to everyone was also what I was like behind the scenes of being authentic and having that legacy.
Well, I'm humbled and honored that you came on the program, Andrew. It's very special to have someone of your caliber and background to come on. And I don't believe it's your last night on earth, to be clear. So many more decades and many more chapters left in your origin story. And who knows, maybe in 20 years or so, we'll have you back again. And God willing, I haven't had my last day, and we'll sit down and have another chat. But if you've enjoyed today's Moxie Talk, we'd love to hear from you. And if you have a certain suggestion for a guest, all you have to do is go out on the internet and type in Kirt Jacobs and MoxieTalk.com. We've got a full, extensive website built out. We're on all your major social media platforms: Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn. We're even on Medium.com and also Instagram. Until next time, I'm Kirt Jacobs. Thanks for watching. Peace.